The rain over Charlotte fell like it was settling a score, and Elijah Cross sat behind the wheel of his old Silverado watching it hammer the windshield, too tired to move. He had been parked outside the Route 9 tavern for 6 minutes, keys still in his hand, because walking inside meant admitting the day was finally over. And some nights, he wasn't ready to admit that. 14 hours at Vance Aerospace. Then, another 2 under his neighbor's minivan, fixing an alternator for $20, and a thank you, had left him hollowed out in the specific way that only stacks after years of it. His refrigerator at home held a block of cheddar cheese, a carton of eggs, and a juice box with his daughter's name written on it in marker, and he was not touching that juice box, no matter how hungry he got. So he ran through the rain and pushed into the tavern, into the noise and the fry grease smell, and the 2 televisions arguing about a foul call nobody agreed on. A waitress named Rosalind waved him toward his usual booth without looking up from her ticket pad, the torn vinyl one, in the back corner he'd been sitting in for 3 years. He slid in, set his keys down, closed his eyes for exactly 5 seconds, and allowed himself that much, and not 1 second more, because across town his 7-year-old daughter, Nora, was doing homework at his neighbor's kitchen table, waiting on him, and whatever weight he was carrying was his to carry, not hers. She had already lost her mother 2 years ago to a heart that gave out too young, and Elijah had promised himself in the hospital hallway that she would never feel like she'd lost him too. He ordered his food, pulled a battered notebook from his jacket, and went back to a problem that had been eating at him for 6 days, a mismatch between fuel flow readings and pressure output on engine 3 of a Gulfstream in Bay 2. Nobody else at the hangar had caught it yet, and he wasn't about to open his mouth until he was certain, because he had learned a long time ago that a black man who raises his voice too early in the wrong room doesn't get heard, he gets reassigned, and smiled at, on his way out the door. He was circling a number on page 4 when he heard glass shatter across the room. A woman at the far end of the bar had knocked her drink to the floor, and the bartender was already reaching for a rag without once looking at her face, the practiced motion of a man who had cleaned up after her more than once that night. She didn't move to help him clean it. She sat frozen on the stool with both palms flat against the bar top, like she was the only thing keeping the room from spinning off its axis. Her dress was red, and clearly not built for a Tuesday night at the Route 9. And the purse beside her on the stool was the kind that costs more than Elijah's truck. 2 men 2 stools down were watching her the way men watch something they've already decided they're owed. And her hands on the bar were trembling. Elijah looked back down at his notebook. Not his business. He had learned that lesson the hard way, that you cannot step into every fire, not when you have a daughter counting on you to come home in one piece. He looked back at her anyway. She was trying to stand. She couldn't. She grabbed the bar's edge and her whole body folded sideways in slow motion, and in the half second before she hit the floor, Elijah was already moving. He crossed the room in 8 strides, and caught her before her knees buckled all the way, one arm around her back, one hand under her elbow, and for 2 seconds the whole bar went quiet, before turning back to its beer. Nobody else got up, not one person. The bartender glanced at her, then at Elijah, and said she'd been drinking since 7, that he'd already cut her off once, that all he had was a first name, Caroline, paid in cash. Elijah looked down at the woman gripping his jacket lapel with both fists, blinking hard like she was trying to bring his face into focus. "Hey," he said, low and even. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," she said, the word coming out careful, like she was handling something breakable. "Do you know where you are?" Confusion moved across her face, then something that looked almost like shame, then confusion again. "Charlotte," she said. "I'm in Charlotte." "Good," he said. "Do you know what street? Do you know your last name?" She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. And in that moment, Elijah saw something that cut straight through every argument he'd been making to himself about staying out of it. It wasn't the glassy look of a woman who'd had 4 drinks too many at happy hour. It was fear, real fear, the kind that lives behind the eyes of someone who doesn't know how she got here and is terrified to say so out loud. "I don't remember," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I don't. Can you call someone?" She dug a cracked phone out of her bag with shaking hands and pressed the button. Dead. "Is there anyone?" he asked. "A friend, family, anyone at all?" She shook her head slowly, eyes filling. "My driver, normally, but he's not coming tonight. I left somewhere I wasn't supposed to leave. Please don't call the police," she said, gripping his jacket tighter. "Please. They'll call my father, and my father will." She never finished the sentence. Elijah stood there in the middle of a bar, with a stranger's full weight in his arms, $300 in his bank account, and a daughter across the city waiting on him. And he understood. There was no one else in that room who was going to be the answer. So he became it. "All right," he said. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe. My daughter's there, my neighbor's watching her, you don't have to worry about a thing." She looked at him, really looked, her eyes clearing just enough to focus on his face. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He didn't have a clever answer, so he gave her the honest one. Because nobody else in this room was going to. The drive across the city took 15 minutes, and she leaned against the window fighting to stay conscious the whole way, not out of stubbornness but because whatever was in her system was pulling her under. He talked to keep her awake, told her his name, told her he fixed aircraft engines for a living, asked her where she was from. "New York," she said eventually, quiet against the glass. "My family's there. I'm sorry about all this," she added. "You don't have to apologize," he said. "You don't even know me." "I could be anybody," he said. "You could be," she answered. And there was something honest in it. Not an insult, just recognition. "You could be anybody too." "I could be," he said, "but I'm not." She didn't speak again until they reached the small house on Larkspur Street, the one with the porch light he always left burning, and the potted fern his daughter had named Gerald, for reasons only she understood. Inside, the house was quiet. His neighbor had already brought Nora home and put her to bed, texting him that everything was handled. The living room was small and clean, crayon drawings taped along the wall, a stuffed rabbit named Colonel sitting on the couch cushion. He moved the rabbit to the armchair, found a blanket in the hall closet, set a glass of water and a bottle of aspirin on the coffee table, and told her where the bathroom was. She stood in the middle of his living room, looking at the drawings and the school folders and the worn couch, and said quietly, "You have a kid." "A daughter," he said, 7, asleep down the hall. She touched the edge of one drawing, a purple house under an orange sun with a stick figure labeled Daddy in careful 7-year-old print. "What do you need?" he asked. "Water, food," she said. "I've got bread, I can make toast." "Toast would be," she started, then stopped herself. "That sounds ridiculous. Toast is toast," he said, and made it. She ate it on his couch in her 4-figure dress at midnight, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then she said, "Caroline. My name is Caroline Vance." The name meant nothing to him at first, a common enough sound in a city full of Vances, and he was too tired to chase it. "Elijah Cross," he said again. "I know," she said. "You told me in the car." A pause. "Elijah Cross, who works at Vance Aerospace." The way she said it was careful, deliberate. "Is that a coincidence?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's not. Walter Vance is my father." He didn't sleep that night. He gave her the couch and the blanket, told her the alarm would go off at 5:30 but she didn't need to get up for it, and went and lay down on the floor of his daughter's room, in the old camping bag he kept there for her nightmare nights. He stared at the ceiling and thought about what morning would look like, about the CEO's daughter asleep on his second-hand couch, about the certifications on his wall, and the reputation he'd spent 15 careful years building. He thought about the 2 promotions he'd been passed over for despite better numbers than the men who got them, men who looked nothing like him. He thought about how thin the line was between respected and suspect for a man like him, how fast a story could flip depending on who was telling it. And then he thought about the 2 men at the bar who had been watching her too long, and decided he'd made the only choice worth making. Nora found the stranger first the next morning. He heard her small footsteps stop cold in the living room doorway. "Daddy," she announced, in the loud whisper of a child who doesn't understand what whisper means. "There's a lady on our couch." "I know, baby," he said. She needed somewhere safe to sleep. "Is she sick?" Nora asked, already steering toward the kitchen at his hand. "No. Did you help her?" "Yes, because nobody else was going to." Nora nodded like that settled it completely. "That's what you always say," she said, and picked up her spoon. Caroline appeared in the kitchen doorway a while later, showered, hair pulled back with a rubber band she'd scavenged from somewhere, looking exhausted but clear-eyed. "Hi," Nora said immediately. "I'm Nora. That's my rabbit, Colonel. My daddy helped you last night." Something shifted in Caroline's face, a real smile this time, not a practiced one. "I know he did," she said. "I'm Caroline." She looked at Elijah. "I charged my phone in your bathroom outlet. I hope that's all right." "It's fine," he said, pouring coffee. "I need to call my father," she said, and closed her eyes for a second before adding, "I'm going to tell him the truth, every part of it." "You don't need to do that on my account," he said. I'm doing it on mine, she said. And something in her voice had changed since the night before, the fear replaced with something settled and decided. I'm doing it because I'm done letting other people decide what the truth looks like. She called her father from the living room while Elijah did the dishes, and 20 minutes later she came back and handed him the phone. He wants to speak with you, she said. Now. He said, please. The voice on the line was deep, controlled, the voice of a man used to rooms going quiet when he spoke. My daughter told me what happened last night, Walter Vance said. I'd like to speak with you in person this morning, if that's possible. I start my shift at 8, Elijah said. I know when your shift starts, Walter answered. Come to my office at 7:30. Caroline will bring you up. A pause. Please. Elijah dropped Nora at school at 7:15, and she hugged him tight for the 3 seconds that was their ritual, before pulling back and looking up at him with total certainty. The lady's going to be okay, she said. I can tell. How? He asked. Because she looked at you like you were somebody important, Nora said, and ran off toward the doors without looking back. He'd been to the executive floor at Vance Aerospace exactly twice in 11 years, both times to fix something. Both times escorted up, and escorted right back down, without a single executive making eye contact. This time he rode the elevator alone with Caroline, who had somehow arranged a change of clothes waiting in the lobby, and walked like a woman who had made her decision, and was walking straight into it. Walter Vance stood when they entered his office, mid-60s, gray at the temples, the same dark eyes as his daughter, though where hers had softened overnight, his were still taking inventory. Elijah did not flinch under that gaze. He had stood in too many rooms where men expected him to, and he wasn't going to start now. Mr. Cross, thank you for coming, Walter said. Please sit. He listened to the whole story without interrupting, the bar, the men who hadn't moved, the drive, the toast, the sleeping bag on his daughter's floor. When Elijah finished, Walter was quiet for a long moment. You've worked here 11 years, he said. And in 11 years, you've never once been on this floor. Not for this, Elijah said. No, Walter said, not for this. What you did last night took more courage than most men I know would manage, Walter said finally. Not because the situation was dangerous, but because you made yourself vulnerable for a stranger and asked for nothing in return. I didn't do it for anything, Elijah said. I know, Walter answered. That's exactly what I'm saying. What none of them knew yet was that someone else had been paying very close attention to that Friday night. Someone with his own reasons to be furious about where Caroline Vance had ended up sleeping. Elijah left the office that morning, neither fired nor thanked, exactly, and walked back down to Bay 2, where his co-worker Tyrell Banks took one look at him and said, You look like you slept on a floor. I did, Elijah said. Do I want to know? Tyrell asked. Probably not today, Elijah said. And Tyrell, who had learned years ago that Elijah explained things on his own schedule, let it go and handed over the clipboard. Pressure sensors still reading wrong, Tyrell said. Kirby wants the full report by end of shift. Also, Bradley Finch stopped by. Bradley Finch was a junior executive, 29, connected through family and old fraternity ties to 3 people on the senior leadership team, possessed of the specific confidence that comes from never once hearing the word no and having it stick. He'd tried to rush Elijah past a safety check 8 months earlier, gotten overruled, and hadn't forgotten it since. When Bradley smiles at me, it's never about scheduling, Elijah said. No, Tyrell agreed. It never is. 2 hours later, working the harness behind the sensor with Tyrell handing him instruments, Elijah found it. A hairline fracture in the wire insulation, invisible to a standard inspection, only visible when you cross-referenced overnight cold-soak thermal data against 3 separate pressure cycles. It had been degrading for months. Left another 6 weeks, it would have triggered a cascading fuel management failure at cruise altitude. That's smaller than my thumbnail, Tyrell said, staring at it. And it could have taken down a plane full of people, Elijah said. Yeah. I know. Elijah bagged the segment, labeled it, and had just set it on the workbench when the whole quality of the room changed the way it does when someone from upstairs walks in. Elijah Cross, Bradley Finch said, tablet in hand, and the smile Tyrell had warned him about already in place. Got a minute. He explained, pleasantly, that as part of a routine scheduling optimization, Elijah's shift would likely be moving to nights starting next month. Nothing personal, just business needs. My shift has been days for 9 years, Elijah said. My daughter's schedule depends on it. It's in my file. It's been my arrangement since my wife passed. Arrangements change, Bradley said, still smiling. Business needs evolve, and left without another word, tossing a nice catch on that censor issue over his shoulder, like an afterthought. Terrell waited exactly 3 seconds after he was gone. That man was not smiling about scheduling, he said. I know, Elijah said. Somebody's already talking about last night. Elijah spent the next 3 hours doing what he always did, careful, methodical, complete documentation, and then sent his full report to his supervisor Sam Kirby, copying the safety compliance officer as required for any FAA notification event. This time, for the first time, he added Walter Vance to the distribution list too, not as leverage, but because the owner of the company was standard protocol for a filing this serious. And today, for the first time, Elijah was primary on one. By noon, Sam Kirby had read the report and told him it was exceptional work, that he was recommending Elijah for a safety commendation. His fourth in 4 years, Terrell pointed out over lunch. Not a promotion. No. You applied for senior lead twice with better numbers than the guy who got it both times. I know. You ever say anything about it? To who? Elijah said. In what room? To what result? Tyrell didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one, not the kind that changed anything. That afternoon a text came in from an unknown number. This is Caroline. My father's assistant gave me your number. I hope that's all right. I wanted to say thank you, and I wanted to say whatever happens at your job because of last, please tell me. I meant what I said. I'm not going to let something bad happen to you because you helped me. Nothing's happening, he typed back. I'm fine. Her reply came in 40 seconds. You're a bad liar, I can tell even through text. Despite everything, he almost smiled. How's your head? He typed. Terrible, she wrote back. Then, after a pause, I'd like to thank you properly, if that's all right with you. I know the power dynamic here isn't simple. He noticed she'd used that phrase without flinching, named the complication instead of pretending it didn't exist. That was rare. We can figure that out, he typed. One need to get back to work. Right, of course, she wrote. Thank you, Elijah. He didn't think about her for the rest of his shift. He thought about almost nothing else on the drive home. Nora was waiting on the neighbor's step with her rabbit and her worksheet, and climbed into the truck asking immediately if the lady was okay, if she'd gone home, if he'd gotten in trouble at work. No, baby, he said. What? You always pause before you say no when something's complicated, she said, and he sat there wondering how a 7-year-old with her mother's sharp mind was going to survive high school without leveling the building. Some things at work might be changing, he told her, but it's not trouble. It's just some people not liking it when other people do the right thing. Did you do the right thing? She asked. I believe I did. Then we'll be okay, she said, with the total serenity of a child who trusted her father completely. That night, after Nora was asleep, Elijah sat at the kitchen table with his notebook and wrote 3 things down, because he had learned that memory bends, and paper doesn't. The fracture, the FAA reference number, and then Bradley Finch's name, the date, and exactly what had been said in that hallway. He wrote a third line, a question, then crossed it out. What does Caroline want? Wrong question. He knew it the second he wrote it. The real question sat underneath it, unwritten, waiting. What does this change? He had no idea that 40 minutes across the city, a man named Preston Cole was awake in a glass-walled apartment overlooking the skyline, watching a security video for the 4th time. It showed a black man in a work jacket helping a woman in a red dress into a pickup truck outside the Route 9 Tavern at 11:47 on a Friday night. Preston Cole paused it on the clearest frame of Elijah's face and reached for his phone, already knowing exactly what story he intended to tell about it. Preston was not a stupid man. He was, in fact, dangerously good at reading power and attaching himself to it. And he had spent 4 years attaching himself to Caroline Vance, an asset worth more than her last name if you could get inside her trust. He had spent the last 6 months watching that trust slip through his fingers as Caroline started reverting to who she'd been before he'd smoothed her edges, asking questions about business dealings between her father and his family, saying no without softening it into something more manageable. Their engagement had never been formally announced. It existed in the understood language of 2 powerful families aligning interests, and the understanding was fraying, and Preston could feel it. Men like Preston Cole respond to losing something by finding someone else to blame for the loss. 2 phone calls got him Elijah's complete employment file, 11 years of performance reviews, 2 denied promotions, a note about a prior dispute with Bradley Finch, and the fact that Elijah Cross was a 35-year-old black single father making $58,000 a year in Bay 2. Preston looked at all of it and understood something immediately. Elijah Cross wasn't a threat. He was leverage. He called Bradley Finch at 7:45 the next morning. "Pull back the scheduling angle," he said, "too obvious. And if Caroline finds out it came from us, I lose the whole play." "What's the play?" Bradley asked. "The one where Elijah Cross doesn't understand what he just walked into," Preston said. "Keep watching him. Let me know if he and Caroline have any further contact you can document." "Why?" Bradley asked. "Because there's a difference," Preston said slowly, "between a man who saved a woman in a bar and a man who's using one, and I intend to make sure Walter Vance sees the second version." Preston had no way of knowing that his story had already been undermined by one thing he hadn't accounted for: a 7-year-old named Nora, who had told her best friend at school that a lady named Caroline had slept on their couch and liked purple and had seemed sad but felt better by breakfast. That friend told her mother, who happened to be married to Tyrell Banks, who read the text at 8:03 and looked at Elijah with such total comprehension when he walked into the bay that Elijah stopped dead in the doorway. "The lady on your couch was Caroline Vance," Tyrell said. "Our Caroline Vance, as in the CEO's daughter." "I helped a stranger," Elijah said. "She turned out to be somebody's daughter. Her father was decent about it." "That's what I said. Vance came to Bay 2 for the first time in 11 years and was decent to the man who took his daughter home." "And Finch's shift change is connected," Elijah said. "Connected how?" Tyrell started, and then stopped cold. "Preston Cole. You know that name," Elijah said. "My wife runs the outreach program at church," Tyrell said. "And Caroline used to volunteer there before she got tangled up with him." "That man is not a good person," Tyrell said, careful and serious now. "He's connected to 3 board members. He's had dinner at Walter Vance's house. He wants Caroline. And it's not because he loves her." "Did Caroline say anything about him?" Tyrell asked. "She said she'd left somewhere she wasn't supposed to leave," Elijah said slowly. "She didn't want her father called because of what he'd do." "Because he'd send her back," Tyrell said. "Back where?" Elijah asked, and felt something cold move through him. "Whatever situation she'd left." That afternoon, Elijah's phone buzzed with a calendar notice: mandatory, for all senior maintenance leads and executive staff. A debrief on the fuel harness finding. Attendees listed 5 executive names, and then, near the bottom, his own. Elijah Cross, Bay 2. Not a promotion, not a title, just his name on a list, in a room that had never had a seat for him before. All right then, he thought. Let's see what that room looks like. Thursday came dressed like any ordinary morning. Elijah sat in his truck 11 minutes early, going over his notes for the 3rd time, not because he didn't know the material cold, but because a black man in a room of executives didn't get the benefit of the doubt on loose ends, so there would be none. Tyrell handed him coffee at the workbench without a word. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll be," Elijah said. "They're going to try to make you feel small," Tyrell said. "Not on purpose, just by existing in a room that wasn't built with you in mind." "I've kept this fleet safe for 11 years, Elijah said. "I'll sit in whatever room needs to hear about it." The conference room held 5 executives already seated. His supervisor, Sam Kirby, 2 men from operations, the chief safety officer, Nadia Park, and Bradley Finch, tablet out, smile already in place. Then the door opened, and Walter Vance walked in, and the whole room straightened without a word being spoken. "Let's begin," Walter said. Nadia walked through the filing process. Then Sam presented the 6-day timeline of Elijah's diagnostic work, saying his name 4 times, which was 4 more times than Elijah had expected. "Mr. Cross," Walter said finally, "walk me through what made you look at the harness instead of the sensor." The room went silent. Every eye turned to him. This was the real test, not the meeting itself, but this question, from the man at the head of the table, in a room where no one had ever addressed him by his last name before. He talked for 4 minutes without glancing at his notes, walking them through the diagnostic logic from first principles. Why the 2 failure modes mimicked each other. Why only an overnight cold soak revealed the divergence. Why he'd cross-referenced 3 data sources instead of stopping at the first. When he finished, the room was silent again. Walter turned to Nadia. If this had been missed, what was the failure timeline? 6 to 8 weeks. She said, "High probability of in-flight fuel loss at cruise altitude." Meaning, Walter said, meaning a potential catastrophic incident depending on passenger load, Nadia said. Walter nodded slowly, looked at Elijah, and said only, "Thank you," before turning to the room and directing that the methodology be logged as a formal training reference, and turning to Bradley Finch specifically to ask why this diagnostic approach wasn't already standard protocol. Bradley opened his mouth. Walter had already moved to the next item. The meeting ended, and Sam Kirby caught Elijah's arm on the way out to tell him he was formally submitting the senior lead recommendation that day, admitting he should have pushed harder years ago. Elijah rode the elevator down alone, or thought he was alone, until Bradley Finch stepped in right behind him and pressed a floor that wasn't his own. "Good meeting," Bradley said. "Walter seems impressed with you. You two have quite a rapport now, it seems, beyond the technical." "We've spoken once," Elijah said. "In his office. About the night with his daughter." "That was," Bradley said, "quite a situation." "I slept on my daughter's floor," Elijah said. "You're welcome to confirm that with Caroline Vance herself. I'm sure that's exactly what happened," Bradley said, and stepped off at the next floor, turning back before the doors closed. "Just something to be mindful of, Elijah. Perception matters in this company." "It always has." Elijah rode the rest of the way down with his jaw tight, then pulled out his phone and typed a note the second he stepped off, time-stamped, word for word what had been implied. That afternoon, Caroline texted that she needed to talk, not text. Could they talk that night after his daughter was asleep? He said, 8:30. She said yes in under 10 seconds. At 8:30, house quiet, Nora asleep, he called her. "My father talked to me for 45 minutes today," she said. "He doesn't usually talk for 45 minutes about anyone." Then her voice changed. "Preston called my father this morning, before the meeting. He sent him the security footage from the parking lot, no context, and told him I was too impaired to consent to going anywhere with you, that you'd offered to drive me, and that whatever story I told my father afterward had been coached." The kitchen went very quiet. "What did your father say?" Elijah asked. "He asked me 3 questions, then said he'd handle it. I don't know yet what that means from him." "How did you find out?" Elijah asked. "Because I called Preston myself," Caroline said, her voice hardening, "and told him I knew, and made him repeat it to my face like he was doing me a favor. He said, 'I'm just protecting you. Someone has to.' He thinks I'll go back to him. He's thought that since August," she said, "since I told him I needed space and he decided space was a negotiating position instead of an answer." Elijah thought about the bar, about her grip on his jacket. "Please don't call the police. They'll call my father, and he'll send me back." He understood the shape of it now. "Whatever Preston tells your father," Elijah said, "I can document my whole night, every detail, the staff, the timeline, the note I left. My father is not your problem," she said. "You didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not letting you spend your energy defending yourself against a lie. It might not be up to me," she said, "but I'm going to try. I'm talking to him face to face tomorrow, and I'm telling him everything Preston's been doing, not just to you, to me, for the last year." "You don't have to do that for me," he said. "I'm not doing it for you," she said simply. "I'm doing it because I should have done it 8 months ago." "Are you okay?" she asked suddenly, and it caught him off guard, the way she paused in the middle of all of it to ask. "I've been through worse," he said. "That's not an answer," she said. "No," he admitted. "It's not. I'm scared for my daughter," he said finally. "If this goes the wrong way, if the easiest story is the one where I took advantage of a situation, and I lose this job." "You're not going to lose this job," she said. "You can't know that," he said. "No," she said. "But I know my father, and I know what he does when he realizes he's made a mistake. He doesn't double down, he corrects it." "Tell me something about Nora," Caroline said suddenly, and he found himself telling her about the rabbit needing a last name, a serious decision Nora refused to rush, and Caroline laughed, real and sudden and unguarded, the first time he'd heard it. "Your wife?" Caroline asked gently, after. "What was she like?" "Her name was Denise," he said. "Second-grade teacher. Loud in the good way. Laughed before jokes even finished, because she could always see where they were going. Braver than me, in the ways that counted. We met at a bus stop," he said. "Both missed the same bus. She called it fate. I called it a bad schedule. She said that was the least romantic thing she'd ever heard, and we argued about it for half an hour, and then I asked for her number anyway. She was right about the fate part," he added quietly. "She sounds like she was wonderful," Caroline said. "She was," he said. They sat in a silence that didn't need filling until Caroline told him to sleep. that the rest would still be there tomorrow, and he'd handle it better with rest than without it. "You sound like Nora," he said. "Your daughter is clearly very wise," she said. "Good night, Elijah." Friday morning, Elijah had been in Bay 2 40 minutes when Sam Kirby called him up to Walter's office for 2 o'clock. When he arrived, Caroline was already there, seated across from her father's desk, looking like whatever conversation had happened before Elijah walked in had cost her something she'd paid willingly. Walter stood behind his desk, looking like a man reorganizing something internal that had shifted overnight. "Preston Cole contacted me yesterday," he said. "I know," Elijah said. "Caroline told me." Walter repeated Preston's version in full without softening it, the accusation that Elijah had targeted a vulnerable woman, that Caroline's account had been shaped by gratitude or coercion, that a man with Elijah's limited means had obvious motive to cultivate a relationship with the boss's daughter. Elijah listened to every word without flinching, then said, "Which part would you like me to start with?" and walked through the whole night again, precise, in order, ending with, "If any part of what Preston told you were true, Caroline would not be sitting in this room right now. She'd have stayed as far from this as possible." She didn't. "Dad," Caroline said, "Elijah is not the story. Preston is." She told her father, plainly, what her life had looked like for the last year, what Preston had really been doing, not just to Elijah, but to her. Walter's phone rang before he could answer. He took the call at the window, and Caroline turned to Elijah fast and low. "He already knows," she said. "I talked to him for 2 hours this morning. Preston's been running financial queries on our subsidiary accounts for 6 months through a legal department contact, positioning himself for a board seat. The engagement was never about me." Walter turned back from the window and said, "Preston Cole will not be in contact with this company or this family again. I'll be handling it today." And Caroline closed her eyes for a long second, absorbing something she'd apparently been holding without realizing it. Then Walter turned to Elijah and asked, unexpectedly, how long he'd been developing that thermal cross-reference diagnostic approach, and whether it was documented, and who else at the company used it. "Nobody," Elijah said. "Not yet," Walter said. "That changes Monday. It goes into the standard protocol, and you're running the training on it, and Sam Kirby's senior lead recommendation is on my desk by end of day today." In the hallway afterward, Caroline asked if he was okay. "Yeah," he said. "I am. This isn't over," she warned. "Preston won't disappear quietly. He'll come at it from another angle. He always does." "Let him," Elijah said. And something in her expression shifted, settled into a different place neither of them named out loud. What none of them knew was that at that exact hour, Preston had already gotten a call from Bradley Finch, telling him Elijah had walked into Walter's office and hadn't walked out in 3 minutes. Preston sat with that for 45 minutes, then called the legal department contact he'd been paying for 6 months, and gave him one instruction. Find something on Elijah Cross. Anything at all. The weekend passed quietly, the way things do right before something loud. Saturday afternoon, Nora looked up from her math worksheet she didn't actually need help with and asked, "Is Caroline coming back?" "What makes you ask that?" Elijah said carefully. "I was just thinking about her," Nora said, with the easy directness only children still have. "She seemed lonely, even when she was smiling." "People can be lonely and still be okay," he said. "I know," Nora said, picking her pencil back up. "But you can help them too, if you want." "I think you want to, Daddy, I can tell." He didn't answer. He thought about it through dinner, and the bedtime chapter, and the quiet hour after, until Caroline texted at 9:47. He called Preston at 5. "I wasn't in the room, but I know my father's voice. And Preston's not coming back." "How are you?" Elijah typed. "Is that a strange thing to say?" she replied. "No," he wrote, "not strange at all." Monday arrived with consequences. Elijah was in Bay 2 at 6, and Tyrell showed up 12 minutes later with 2 coffees and something on his mind. "My wife heard something from a friend at church," Tyrell said. "The legal department contact running Preston's queries is named Perry Webb, and Perry came home Friday night looking like he'd seen his own grave, telling his wife he was in over his head. Preston told him to find something on you Friday afternoon," Tyrell said. "If there's nothing to find," Elijah said slowly, "that's not a scheduling problem anymore. That's manufacturing evidence. Or it means there's nothing there, and this is what happens next," Elijah said, thinking it through. He doesn't need proof, just a story plausible enough to make Walter hesitate, Long enough for the promotion to stall. Long enough for the whole thing to fade. Not destroy me, Elijah said. Just slow me down until I can't afford to wait anymore. That's cold, Tyrell said. That's how it works when you don't have power yet, Elijah said. So what do we do? Tyrell asked. What I've always done, Elijah said. Document everything, and make sure this time it lands somewhere that can't be quietly buried. By 10, Nadia Park called directly. A legal department query had come in that morning for a background verification on him, flagged as triggered by the FAA filing, which wasn't standard procedure. Those only run at hire or promotion. Who requested it? Elijah asked. Perry Webb in legal, she said. I don't know who told him to. I wanted you to know, because an improper query like this is a compliance issue. And I take that seriously. Is there something happening I should know about? She asked. I think someone's looking for leverage where there isn't any, Elijah said. And I think the looking is going to leave more of a trail on them than on me. That's a precise way to put it, Nadia said. I document everything, Elijah said. I have for 11 years. Good, she said. And something personal moved under the professional tone of it. At noon, Caroline texted that Perry Webb had requested an urgent meeting with her father that afternoon. He's not going to defend Preston, Elijah typed back. He's going to confess and ask for protection. By 3, she confirmed it. Webb had told Walter everything, the queries, Preston's instructions, all of it, and Webb had kept records of his own the whole time. Insurance against a man he'd always suspected would throw him away eventually. Preston Cole is not going to be in this building again, Caroline wrote. And I don't think he's going to be welcome in very many buildings for a while. Elijah sat with his phone in his hand and thought about the whole chain of it. The storm, the red dress, the toast at midnight, the sleeping bag on his daughter's floor, the elevator, the conference room, the compliance flag, Perry Webb lying awake with his own conscience, all of it stacking into something that finally, for once, was working in his favor instead of against him. 2 weeks later, Elijah stood in Bay 2, wearing a new title on his badge, Senior Lead. The words still strange in his mouth when he said them out loud to Tyrell, who told him it was about time and meant it. Caroline came by the hangar that Friday afternoon. No security detail, no announcement, just walked in wearing jeans for what he suspected was the first time all year, and asked if he and Nora wanted company for dinner. Nora answered before he could, informing Caroline gravely that the rabbit had finally settled on a last name, Beauregard, after careful deliberation, and that this was an excellent time to celebrate it with tacos. Over dinner at his kitchen table, purple drawings still taped to the wall, Caroline laughed twice, real laughs, and Nora declared her officially approved. A verdict Elijah found he agreed with more than he was ready to say out loud. Walter Vance never became a warm man overnight, that wasn't in him. But every quarter after that, his safety review meetings included a technician from Bay 2 by name, and the training protocol on the wall carried Elijah Cross's name at the bottom of it where anyone walking through could read it. Preston Cole's name surfaced in a business journal 8 months later, in an article about an insider trading investigation tied to unauthorized subsidiary queries at 3 separate companies, and Elijah read it once, without much feeling, and closed the tab. Some nights, Elijah still sat in the truck outside the tavern for a few extra minutes before going in, not out of exhaustion this time, but because he'd learned that some pauses were worth taking on purpose, instead of just surviving through. He had spent 11 years being the man who did the work nobody noticed, the invisible hand that kept planes in the sky and asked for nothing in return. And somewhere in one rainy October night that had almost cost him everything, it had instead finally given his name a place in the room. He didn't need the room to validate him. He'd known who he was the whole time, holding his daughter through nightmares, holding a stranger up off a bar floor, holding the line on what was right even when nobody was watching. But it was something, watching Nora fall asleep some nights now, with Caroline's laugh still echoing faintly from the kitchen, watching his own name finally get said out loud in a room built to overlook men exactly like him. To understand that sometimes the right decision, made in under a minute, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, was the only kind of decision that ever really counted. The following spring, Vance Aerospace held its annual safety banquet in the same downtown ballroom Elijah had once driven past without ever imagining walking into, and this year, his name was printed on the program itself, third from the top, under a category called Technical Excellence. Tyrell wore a suit that didn't fit quite right, and complained about it the entire drive over, and Nora wore a purple dress she had picked out herself, and insisted on carrying Beauregard the rabbit tucked under one arm, despite Elijah's gentle attempts to leave him in the truck. Caroline met them at the door, and when Nora ran ahead to show off the rabbit to anyone who would look, Caroline slipped her hand briefly into Elijah's, and said nothing. And he said nothing back. And it was enough. Walter Vance took the stage near the end of the evening and spoke for exactly 4 minutes about the harness finding on the Gulf Stream, about the 6 days of quiet documentation nobody had asked for and everybody had needed, and called Elijah up to the microphone in front of 300 people who had spent 11 years walking past him in hallways without a second glance. Elijah kept his remarks short, the way he kept most things, thanking Tyrell, thanking Nadia Park for taking a compliance flag seriously when it would have been easier not to, thanking his daughter for reminding him most mornings what doing the right thing actually looked like in practice. He did not mention Caroline by name, and when he stepped down from the stage, she was the first person he found in the crowd, and the look on her face told him she hadn't needed the mention to know exactly what he meant. Bradley Finch had quietly transferred to a regional office in another state 2 months earlier, a move the company described as a lateral opportunity, and nobody in Bay 2 shed any tears over the paperwork. Perry Webb kept his job, on the condition that every query he ever ran again went through triple documentation, and he became, oddly, one of the most meticulous record keepers in the entire legal department. A changed man in the specific way that fear sometimes changes people for the better when it doesn't break them first. Sam Kirby, retired the following winter and made a point of shaking Elijah's hand at his own farewell party and telling him that recommending him for senior lead had been the easiest decision of his career, even though everyone in the room knew it had taken him 11 years to make it. Elijah still kept the same spiral notebook in his jacket pocket, still wrote things down in the same careful hand, because some habits a man builds to survive a hostile world don't disappear just because the world gets a little kinder. He still parked outside the Route 9 Tavern some Fridays, and sat behind the wheel for a few extra minutes before going in, though these days it was less about gathering the strength to face another exhausting shift, and more about savoring the quiet ordinary weight of a life that finally fit him the way it was supposed to. Nora turned 8 that August and declared, with the same solemn authority she brought to every major decision, that Beauregard the rabbit needed a sibling, and spent 3 weeks lobbying for a real one before settling, temporarily, for a stuffed elephant she named Professor. Caroline started spending Sunday afternoons at the house on Larkspur Street, not every week, not with any grand announcement, just steadily, the way trust rebuilds itself, between two people who had once been strangers thrown together by a rainstorm and a decision that cost nothing to make and meant everything once it was made. Walter Vance never fully softened. That wasn't who he was built to be, but he started calling Elijah by his first name in meetings, which, for a man like Walter, was its own kind of standing ovation. And on quiet nights, after Nora was asleep and the house had gone still, Elijah sometimes thought back to that first evening, the rain against the windshield, the 6 wasted minutes he'd spent sitting in the parking lot, too tired to move, and understood that the 6 minutes hadn't been wasted at all. They'd just been the last 6 minutes of a life that was about to change the moment he finally got out of the truck. He had spent 15 years being told, in 100 small unspoken ways, that men like him were meant to stay in the background, fixing what broke, absorbing what fell, and asking for nothing. It had taken one terrified stranger in a red dress, one honest 7-year-old with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, and one long overdue conversation in an office on the executive floor to prove that the background was never where he belonged in the first place. He had simply been waiting, the way careful men often do, for the room to catch up to what he had always known about himself.